That Was Then, This Is Now is a book written by S.E. Hinton and was first published in 1971. This book consists of 159 pages and 11 chapters. In Chapter 1, we meet the main character, Brian Douglas, and his foster brother, Mark. At this point in time, both Brian and Mark are teenagers. Mark was adopted at the age of 9 by Brian's mother. Mark's parents both shot each other after getting in a drunk argument. We also meet one of their friends by the name of Eminem and his sister Kathy, who Brian really likes. In Chapter 2, we learn that Brian's mom is in the hospital because she just had a very expensive operation. While at the hospital, Brian's mom has him and Mark go look at the kid who got beat up by his own gang members after he attempted to save a young black woman. Also, Brian asks Kathy out in this chapter. In the next chapter, Brian searches for a job to help pay for his mother's bills. Mark is attacked after trying to save one of his friends at the school dance. Brian later finds out that this attack was set up by his ex-girlfriend and vows to get revenge on Angela. In Chapter 4, Mark is caught driving the principal's car, which he had hot-wired, but claims that he borrowed it to make it to his parole appointment. This is ironic because Mark is on parole for stealing cars. Brian realizes that Mark can get away with anything. In the next chapter, Brian and Mark hustle two rough Texans who ambush them after the bar closes, holding them at gunpoint in the alley. Charlie, the owner of the bar and one of their close friends, comes to their rescue but gets killed in the process. The police give Charlie's car to Mark and Brian. Unlike Mark, Brian feels guilty about Charlie's death. Brian then begins to spend more time with Kathy, who understands him. In Chapter 6, we see the Texans are caught, and Mark and Brian both testify at the trial. Brian's mom is still in the hospital at this point, and Brian decides to take Charlie's advice and clean up his appearance and his attitude so he can get a job and help pay his mom's bills. Kathy tells Brian she thinks Eminem is doing drugs. Later that night, Eminem goes away with some friends and claims he's never coming back. In Chapter 7, Eminem does not come home the next day, and Brian and Kathy spend every night for a week looking for him. Brian finally gets a job and starts earning money. Mark starts to bring in a lot of money, which Brian is suspicious about and assumes he is gambling. At the end of the chapter, Mark claims he knows where Eminem is. In Chapter 8, Mark directs Brian to a house in a rundown part of town. The people in this house know Mark and call him Cat. Mark asks about Baby Freak, which is Eminem's hippie name, but he's not there at the time. In Chapter 9, Brian finally tells Kathy he loves her and that he has a lead on where Eminem is. 2 nights later, Brian and Kathy go to the hippie house where they find Eminem huddled in the corner of a room, crashing from a massive LSD-induced hallucination. Kathy calls her father, who meets them at the hospital. We see in the next chapter that the doctor claims that Eminem's brain is fried and that he will never be the same. After returning home from the hospital, Brian stumbles upon Mark's stash of drugs, and out of frustration, he calls the cops on Mark. When Mark finds this out, he is very apologetic and claims he will change, but it's too late. In the final chapter, Brian struggles with justifying turning in his brother and realizes he no longer loves Kathy. A month later, Brian goes to visit his brother in jail, and Mark claims that he hates him and will never forgive him. While Brian tries to joke about their past times, Mark claims, "That was then, this is now." As the book ends, Brian wishes he could go back to his simple youth years when everything made sense and he had all the answers. The ending of this book is a huge cliffhanger and makes me hope for a sequel. Although the significance of this book tries to convey that everyone has to grow up and is going to change. And how will you handle it? Will you be like Brian, who cares about only himself and his brother until he meets Kathy, who opens up his eyes? Or will you be like Mark and let peer pressure allow you to make many bad decisions and never mature, because that was then and this is now?